We have Emery Cowan on the call today, representing the National Learning Network, ready to discuss the Community Navigators Program. So I will ask that you give her a big welcome as she kicks off our presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Rachel. Before I dive into a PowerPoint presentation, wanted to just get a better sense for folks in the room and familiarity with federal funding and grant writing, et cetera. So if you all could feel free to turn your cameras on or not, but use the raise hand function in Zoom to just raise your hand if the following questions apply to you. So I wanted to see how many of you all, your organizations have received federal funding, federal dollars in the past, like 3 years, let's say. Raise your Zoom hand if that applies to you. Maybe no one. Oh, there we go. Okay, so a few people. And maybe other folks might be with federal agencies, acknowledge that as well. What about have dedicated development staff at your organization? How many people's organizations have dedicated staff for fundraising? Okay, Tess with Coco. A lone hand. And last question, how many of you have development and grant writing as one of your ancillary duties? Okay. Yeah, I need to be raising my hand as well. Okay, that's great to know because I think that hopefully the resources that we're sharing today are relevant to folks who have kind of touch federal funding and partnerships in any way. So with that, I'll dive into the presentation. Gabe, if you want to fire that up.
Yeah, get that started up.
Thanks.
Welcome in, everyone.
Oh, I forgot to do my intro. My name is Emery Cowan. I'm a policy and partnerships manager with the Watershed the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, and we are fiscally sponsored by the Watershed Research and Training Center. The Watershed Center is based in Hayfork, California, and the FACNet team is a remote team. So I am based in Hood River, Oregon, and have had the pleasure of being involved in our Community Navigator initiative for the past 6 months or so. So excited to share it with you all, and have some co-presenters with Gabe and Tess, and they're going to be introducing themselves as they kind of take up the presentation at different parts of our session today. All right, Gabe, I'm ready for you whenever.
Great, here we are.
Thanks. Awesome. So that's what we're talking about today, our Community Navigator Initiative. You can hop over to the next slide, Gabe. So, ooh.
Just 1 second here. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I'm gonna go ahead and fire it back up.
There we are. Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context and background for this initiative, really rooted in policy direction from the Biden administration that put a much greater emphasis on making sure the benefits of federal programs and actions were flowing to underserved and disadvantaged communities to really address some of the longstanding disparities and inequities that are perpetuated by our federal policies. And so the administration, you all may be familiar with, its Justice 40 initiative that directed 40% of all climate resilience related funding, that federal agencies should put that amount toward benefiting underserved or disadvantaged communities. The administration also released the map on the right that also may be familiar to folks, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool that kind of highlights communities that through a number of different criteria are identified as disadvantaged. So federal agencies, especially those in programs within the Forest Service were directed to kind of make sure funding was getting to those communities in particular. However, there's been a broad realization and realization within the agencies as well that it doesn't work to just identify underserved communities and say that funding should get there. Next slide, Gabe. And that's kind of illustrated in a few statistics that came out of analyses by Headwaters Economics, and that's a research organization based out of Montana. And through analyzing recipients of recent funding opportunities, they found that, for example, despite kind of an intent to get the key funding sources to underserved communities, only 3% of a big FEMA's big Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, only 3% went to projects in low capacity counties. And when it comes to the Forest Service's recent Community Wildfire Defense Grant funding round, less than half of funding went to projects in low capacity communities. So basically, there's still a lot of improvement to be had to get funding to communities that need it most. Next slide. And what we all know is that there are just a lot of steps, barriers, hurdles to actually connecting a community partner with an idea and really inspired people and a lot of different strengths and assets to a federal funding source that might be able to help them realize their goals. And agencies have also acknowledged that their processes and systems are really complex and that it's a pretty impossible task for a community without dedicated resources or people that can really focus in on development to do all that it takes to connect with a federal funding source or partnership opportunity. So next slide, Gabe. And so that is where the Forest Service's Community Navigator Program comes in, or I guess we're calling it an initiative now. It's a relatively recent effort that started up late, kind of mid to late last year, and the Forest Service entered into partnerships with a number of organizations that already have a lot of experience working with community partners, have networks like the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, and a history of capacity building. And so our goal is really to help kind of do the help with relationship building or partnerships or kind of technical know-how or other ways that we can build capacity within communities to connect with federal funding and partnerships, specifically kind of Forest Service funding and partnerships. And we focus in most of these efforts on communities facing wildfire risk or climate change impacts, and especially those that are historically underserved, including rural and low-income communities. This is kind of some of the Forest Service language around the need for this program, but highlight is that we are focusing our efforts in particular on some of the funding that has been provided through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, just because that's where a lot of attention and opportunity is. But we certainly are not just kind of limiting our work to those funding sources, knowing that they might not align with a community's needs and capacities. So not stopping there, but that's kind of a central focus and inspiration for this program. I'm going to pause for a second and turn it over to one of our awesome organizational partners on this initiative. Tess, if you want to chime in about who you are and kind of what your all's work is on this initiative.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's really great to see all of you today, to see some familiar faces and some folks that I haven't met before. My name's Therese Dioria-Riley. I go by Tess, and I'm the Community Navigator Program Director for Coalitions and Collaboratives. So I'll share our organization's CNP landing page in the chat if anyone wants to check it out. And Emery will, in a couple of slides, go through the other organizations that also house the CNP program. But we do work pretty collaboratively on the back end. So you might not see me or interact with me directly. You may, but just know that several of these organizations running the C&P program are coordinating pretty intensively on the back end to ensure that we're really identifying and getting funding and resources to the communities that the Forest Service has identified. These historically underserved communities, which include tribes, rural communities, communities at high risk of wildfire, and communities at high risk of other climate impacts. And so, yeah, just wanted to introduce myself. Thank you all for joining us. And I'll share the additional organization links when Emery introduces those organizations too. But thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and just one more point that Tess is in Salida, Colorado, so might be kind of a CNP based at some of our in-person offerings in the future. Okay, keep moving along. Awesome. One of the other things that I wanted to emphasize about this program is a focus on reducing barriers that communities face to accessing federal opportunities. And so I kind of like had the steps that are usually kind of typical of trying to access a federal funding opportunity. And so we really want to like even that playing field and provide feedback from our work with communities to that can help address barriers, create programs that are more aligned with community needs and capacities. So trying to create some better feedback loops between community partners and federal agencies. We can move along to the next slide, Gabe. So just as Tess mentioned, and what we wanted to just provide a little bit of kind of the back end for everyone to understand. This program, it looks like, is deployed by the Forest Service through agreements with a number of different nonprofit organizations. You'll see the Watershed Center and coalitions and collaboratives there on the left, and our little arrow that shows that we're working really closely, but really we're working closely with a lot of these other organizations as well to make sure that we know that we all have different networks and different sources of expertise. So making sure that anyone who needs or kind of approaches our organizations for support, that we are working together to make sure that we're addressing those needs by whoever kind of is best positioned to do so. So I also wanted to note that we're taking kind of different approaches to who we're working with and how we're carrying out our community navigator work. And that is where the Watershed Center and FACNet's partnership with the Forest Stewards Guild and FAC New Mexico comes in. We're working really closely with these organizations, as well as a few other kind of regionally positioned nonprofits that already have really deep relationships with community partners, have some of this know-how around navigating federal funding and partnerships. And so we are working directly with these organizations to kind of bolster their ability to connect with partners and provide this sort of assistance that we want to provide through the Community Navigator Initiative. So hence kind of why we're doing this webinar and why Gabe is able to kind of be this resource for folks that might need it. And we'll get into kind of ways of making of connecting regarding community needs in a little bit. But that's the back end of our kind of org chart. We're also working really closely with a community of practice that's kind of highlighted in the upper right. A couple of other agencies are also deploying similar navigator type initiatives, the EPA being one of them, USDA Rural Development being another. So these are initiatives that you all may have heard about. We're trying to make sure that we're coordinating and also learning best practices from one another. I think I'll leave it at that and move ahead to kind of the buckets of work that we are focusing in on. So in addition, so kind of key buckets of our work is that direct one-on-one client outreach and support. we are basically starting at wherever point a community partner might be at, and then kind of figuring out what support we can help provide. And that is going through regional navigators like FAC New Mexico and the Guild, as well as some other individuals that we're working with to provide support. We also are developing different learning and training opportunities, different resources. So at the end, we'll share out, let's see, we're compiling a website of funding sources and relevant resources for this work of wildfire and climate resilience. We're doing some pretty specific resource development around navigating funding, like portals and getting yourself kind of grant ready. We're doing some trainings related to Forest Service agreements, kind of understanding that as an opportunity. And we also have some trainings that we've done related to developing community wildfire protection plans, knowing that that's a key component of the big federal community wildfire defense grant opportunity. So instead of barraging you with links, I'll get that out that Gabe, you can send it out in a follow-up email. And then we're also doing kind of that feedback loop of providing feedback to specific program managers that they can utilize to make their programs more accessible to communities. And then for the regional navigation support, I will hand it over to Gabe to talk a little bit more about what FAC New Mexico is planning.
Awesome. Thanks, Emery. And I'm just going to take another chance to stop screen sharing here for just a second and just introduce myself. I work with the Forest Stewards Guild. My name is Gabe Kohler. I work in our Southwest region here in Santa Fe. I get to do a variety of things with the Forest Stewards Guild. One of them is working with Rachel Bean, who introduced our webinar today, to coordinate the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network, which is how you all are connected to this webinar today, I suppose. And so just really excited to offer this type of support. You know, we've heard a lot throughout the years in working with the Guild and working with Fire Adapted New Mexico, that especially in recent years where there's a lot of funding coming through different pipelines, and it can be a challenge to get a proposal that's shovel ready or that's kind of in the right, you know, stage of partnership and development to access that funding. And then once folks have that funding, you know, being able to kind of manage that award can be a huge challenge. And there's real risk there. There's financial risk. And so I'm excited to see this approach being kind of adopted from, you know, Washington office level of Forest Service and also other organizations, agencies. Thanks for being on, Teresa. Yeah, and so this represents kind of a shift in the way that, you know, we do outreach and kind of provide assistance for some federal grant programs. And so really excited to provide access to this programming through the Learning Network. I guess I'm interested in hearing a little bit of who's on the call. We have a smaller group today, which I think is good. I wonder if folks would be willing to share kind of their name and who they work with, if they're affiliated with an agency or organization, or where they're working, if you're in a specific part of the state. It'd be great to just kind of know who we have in the room a little bit before I kind of dive into how the network might be able to support you. And I'm glad to see that Teresa was on today, but she had to leave. Teresa works with New Mexico BLM as the mitigation, education, and trespass person, and is a funding partner for the New Mexico Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. So really glad to have Teresa on. Other folks, who do we have on today? If you wouldn't mind just adding a quick line in the chat so that we can know a little bit about who we're talking to here. Yeah, Lauren, you can go ahead and just unmute if you'd like to. Hey, Sean.
Yeah, I don't know if the camera's going to work or not. Oh, I guess it is. We have such a small group here. I mean, it's kind of a big thing with this navigation is kind of informal communication and connecting with people, whether it be tribes or us or whoever. I'm Lauren Ingalls. I'm with the Forest Service in the regional office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I'm just south of Rachel and you, Gabe. And then I actually have ties to Northeast Oregon. So I hope the weather's good in Hood River, Emery. But anyway, I've been trying to deal with grants with working with the tribes, Forest Service grants with landscape scale restoration in New Mexico and Arizona. And the information and what that you're trying to do with this community navigators is fantastic. It's exactly what's needed. And I'm glad to see it kind of getting rolling along and getting started and everything. One thing is great information with those slides. Is it possible we could get a copy of those slides that Emery was showing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs
just,
up for sure.
Just to maybe share with tribes or something. And then one question as far as your navigation goes, do you just deal with the U.S. Forest Service grants, or do you also deal with other departments and agencies? I think the tribes are kind of confused. There's so many different grant opportunities, and sometimes the different agencies, they have other grant opportunities. Are you guys just focused U.S. Forest Service only, or do you do other departments and agencies?
I can take a crack at that, but I guess Emery kind of indicated earlier, like we're trying to provide technical assistance. Some folks are going to be interested in federal grant, Forest Service stuff, but we're not going to stop there. Like we really do want to kind of support our partners. If they're willing to outreach to us for technical assistance, we want to kind of find, how we can help them out. Is that right, Emery? So going a little bit beyond just, working on IRA, BIL programs and trying to help them out however we can, but.
Yeah, and I think that, Lauren, we're trying to make a lot of connections again with those like community navigator programs that are being stood up by other agencies, and just making sure that we're connecting with as many other sources of support as possible. So if we don't have the expertise, we can send people to the right resource if it might be a little bit an area where they have better subject matter expertise.
Great. That's fantastic to hear that. And then one last question. There's like 3 or 4 tribes I'm dealing with right now that I could actually say, hey, here's a place that will help you navigate through all the complexity of these grants. Can you either put in the chat or send to me or something, the actual point of contact and phone number that I can give to them to try to get the process started?
Absolutely. I can drop our intake form in the chat right now. And you can also have them reach out to me directly if they're, in New Mexico. That's like what we're saying is that it's a bit of a network approach where if they, reach out to me or they reach out to Tess or whoever, we're going to work together on the back end to make sure that they're working with the right person. So, but for our purposes, I'm going to link you to the FACNM intake, which is right here in the chat. And we'll get to a little bit more about kind of our specific fire adapted New Mexico program here in just a second. So I just wanted to kind of know who we got in the room,
Okay.
that kind of stuff.
I'll cut off. I didn't mean to take up so much of your time, but this is really good to see this getting started and rolling along. So this is great. So I'll jump off here and let the next person go.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for just sharing that little bit. And you're right, Lauren, we really are wanting to kind of work on relationship building and peer learning here. So sharing information and kind of hearing from you all about how this touches down in your work is really important to how we are wanting to approach this program. And so we have, like I said, we're recording today, we have this chat, so we'll make sure to kind of keep track of who we've got on the call today and work with you going forward. But with that, I'm going to share a little bit about how the Guild is working as a regional navigator with Emery and with Tess as kind of the more upper level cohort. So here we are. I'm going to just go ahead and, excuse me, I need to get my slides back up. And here we are. Just click. All right, so not to throw too many logos at you today. I know this might already be a bit confusing. We're working together. That's the approach here. This is a network approach that's being, used by the Forest Service at the upper level to reach community organizations, to reach, local reference organizations that have better kind of relationships with certain underserved communities. And because of that, because we're working with such a diverse group of organizations, it can get a little confusing. We've got Coco on, the call, which is one organization that's a CMP partner. We've got FACnet and the Watershed Center that Emery represents. We've got Hispanic Access Foundation is another navigator. Just kind of going back, I'll show you that diagram one more time. There's a lot of different of these upper level navigators, so it can get a little confusing. But for your point of entry, if you're approaching this program or this call through the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network, you can just use that link in the chat that gets you into our intake. And I can work with Emery and Tess on the back end to make sure that you all are kind of working with the right point of contact, if that makes sense. So it's all one program, but there's many different points of entry in kind of a network approach. And the reason for that network approach is exactly like what Emery was saying, is that we want to reach kind of into more grassroots, organizations and into organizations that have deeper relationships with communities that haven't been served well in the past. So that's the intention. And so Lauren, working with you, if you have relationships with certain tribal governments, or you've been kind of working with folks for a long time, you can reach out to the network, and I can work with you, and we can work together with those groups. Just kind of leveraging existing relationships to get information and capacity out to folks that need it. And so the organization that I work with is called the Forest Stewards Guild, and we're a nationwide nonprofit, but we're based out of New Mexico. And we've worked in forestry for over 30 years and have developed a wide range of, projects across the state, across the region, that have helped us build really deep relationships with certain communities in New Mexico. Working on landscape scale restoration and forestry and wildfire risk reduction involves working across boundaries. And when we work across boundaries, we really have to kind of build relationships and trust. And so that's how the Guild has been involved in this Community Navigator program, is because of our work with communities across New Mexico for a long time. And so we worked with different tribal governments in New Mexico. We'd like to continue to build that representation and work with, more effectively with different tribal governments. There's a lot of need to go to work with them more effectively and more meaningfully. Traditional communities in New Mexico, we have a lot of land grant communities, acequia associations, Hispano communities across New Mexico that we can reach out to more effectively. So a wide variety of different, organizations and partners that we have worked with and want to work with more meaningfully. So that's the Forest Stewards Guild. One of the programs that the Guild coordinates is the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And so the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network is a regional navigator. You can use that link in the chat to reach out for support through the Fire Adapted Communities New Mexico program. And as Rachel mentioned at the beginning, this Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network is all about providing opportunities for peer learning and professional relationship building. And so webinars like this, this, is an example of kind of a more structured webinar. I'm glad that we got to hear from you all a little bit in the chat, and I'd like to talk more towards the end. We're going to have some kind of time to do question and answer at the end. But what we try and do through these webinars and our connection calls, which happen bi-monthly, and our membership directory, is provide opportunities for folks to talk to one another. And so there are folks on this call that have expertise that might support your work. And I want to be able to get out of the way as a network coordinator and let you all talk to one another as best as possible. And so that's one way that the Learning Network can support your work, is by getting in touch with people who are facing similar challenges that you are. With that, we have a lot of different members and leaders in the Learning Network. I think right now we're just over 100 members and leaders across the state. All of those different members and leaders are working in different roles. Some of them are kind of at the community level doing, Firewise work or doing very specific kind of community leadership roles. Others are working with land management agencies at kind of a more upper level. Wherever role you're working in, there are other folks in the network that can help inform your work. And maybe it's that kind of cross-pollination of information, a fire management officer talking to a community leader in an adjacent community. That's one way that this network can be supportive. Maybe it's a community leader talking to another community leader working in a similar role. Both of those things can be helpful. So that's kind of what that networking looks like. Some of that is related to kind of Firewise, kind of mitigation oriented stuff, doing defensible space, doing home hardening, doing kind of projects right up around the home, and kind of that, wildfire mitigation sphere. Others is kind of related to more landscape scale resilience. And maybe that's working on public land to reintroduce prescribed fire, or to do kind of landscape scale wildfire risk reduction projects. There's folks within the network that have kind of different skill sets. Like I said, some are focused around the home, kind of resident mitigation side, and others are more that landscape resilience piece that's on public land and kind of focuses on kind of watershed health and forest climate adaptation. So just wanting to recognize that there are different sets of skills within the network and folks working in different roles. And then finally, there's a lot of different experience in the network related to administrative capacity, different types of non-governmental organizations like the Forest Stewards Guild, for example, that have a long history managing grants and applying for grants. And that is another set of expertise that exists within the network that you can tap into through this Community Navigator program. So within the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network, we have a handful of folks that have already received funding through some of these programs. We have folks that have received Wood Innovations grants that we can connect you to. We have folks that have received Community Wildfire Defense grants that we can connect you to. We'd like to continue to build a cohort of successful awardees within the network. So just offering like examples of a successful proposal might be one thing that the network can offer you. We're already working to kind of build a bit of a library of, here's an example of a successful Wood Innovations grant proposal, for example. And can we use that as a bit of a template and start to build off that, not reinventing the wheel? So that's one example of how the network, the Fire Adapted New Mexico network, can provide some capacity to you. Within the network, as I mentioned, we have a wide range of members and leaders. Some of these members and leaders might be a partner that you can work with on some of these federal grant programs. So, for example, we have a lot of county fire departments that are involved in the Learning Network. Maybe your county fire department is in the network already, or we can get them into the Learning Network and work with them on proposal development through the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network. There's other organizations. We have, like I said, over 100 different organizations that can be potential partners for some of these funding programs and can provide capacity to those proposals. And then finally, webinars like this, our newsletter, and in-person events and workshops that we offer through the Learning Network can be a really helpful place to build awareness of federal land management partnership opportunities and grants. So right here it says partnership opportunities, but I think we're also going to talk a lot about grant opportunities as well. So just kind of getting high quality information through our newsletter, getting high quality information through this type of webinar or in-person events is another way that the Learning Network can support your work. And here's a list of those kinds of offerings. Like I said, we have the ability to offer individual technical assistance for accessing these federal dollars through the link that I shared in the chat. We have our bi-weekly newsletter that's called Wildfire Wednesdays, which you can sign up for on the FACNM website. We'll be sharing out information related to Community Navigator webinars and learning opportunities on that newsletter. So that's a great kind of information pathway to get involved in if you'd like to learn more. There's that member directory on our website where you can find other partners to work with on a proposal. Maybe it's working with our Nature Conservancy representative, or maybe it's working with the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute. But finding those folks through the network that you can partner with on a proposal is going to strengthen your proposal. And so that's another opportunity, is to use that member directory to kind of build who you're working with on your proposal and kind of build a more robust approach. We have bi-monthly connection calls for our members and leaders. This is a great place to talk to other people who are trying to, do proposal development, or that have faced similar, funding programs that you might be interested in. Again, sharing templates, that peer-to-peer model. That's what that connection call is going to be for, is connecting to other members and leaders directly without being on a webinar and having to kind of, hear me talk, or, go through a newsletter or whatever. Those connection calls are where it's just kind of open format. And so as a member or leader, you can say, hey, I would like to know who in the network can support me in a wood innovations proposal on that connection call. And as a coordinator, I can either connect you to that person, or they may already be on the call with you and they can say, hey, I've done that. Let's connect offline, that kind of thing. So I want to highlight those connection calls as a good opportunity to really leverage the network. We know that working in partnership is going to be not only lead to more effective ecological and social outcomes, but it's also more competitive in some of these funding programs. A lot of these programs want to see that you're working with, a variety of organizations. And so I think that's how we can kind of use the network, leverage the network to build effective proposals. And then finally, we can offer in-person events. These don't have to be big. This can be a roundtable discussion in your community, and I can provide capacity to support that event. So Lauren, for example, if you were working with folks in your county or in your kind of landscape regionally, and you wanted to get a discussion together about a proposal, we can come to you and do a roundtable discussion and ask some targeted questions and bring some kind of templates to work through with the group and facilitate that. So these in-person learning exchanges are an example of a type of individual technical assistance that we can offer through the Learning Network. And I think that might be the end of my slides, but I'm going to pass it back. Emery, I don't know if you wanted to share. This is kind of just to put on people's radar, I think, some of the funding that's coming through.
Yeah, I can be super brief with this one, given that we have a lot of people with agencies who are probably very well aware of these funding opportunities. But just in terms of what's on our radar coming up would be the Community Wildfire Defense Grant, these Wood Innovations grants. So we're definitely teeing up to provide support for folks who might be interested in those. But also knowing that a lot of people are really involved in collaborative groups, partnerships. Wanted to highlight that just kind of to have on people's radar, the NFF has a new collaborative capacity program that they are going to start rolling out in the summer. There's also an open funding window for the Catalyst Fund, which is funded by the Network for Landscape Conservation, that again provides funding to landscape partnerships. That deadline is April 26th. And we have all of these. Well, we are working very quickly to put all of these funding opportunities on our website, but we share them out through our newsletter and also our things that we can compile and get sent out for folks to share. But just giving a sense for yes, we are Forest Service focused, but we're also keeping an eye on a lot of the other different funding sources and opportunities that would be relevant to people in this network and just more generally working on climate and wildfire resilience. But before we kind of turn it loose to a discussion, I did want to hand it over to Tess. Coco's developing some awesome funding opportunities specifically tied into the community navigator work.
Yeah, and we're really hoping to have it announced as soon as possible, maybe next week, we'll see. But we are putting out funding for really for organizational capacity building. So it won't be really project specific, which we know nonprofits really are strapped when so much of the funding is tied to project deliverables, and this will be more tied to providing training, hiring staff, working on strategic plans and things like that. So it'll be really focused on operational capacity as opposed to like project output and outcomes.
And all that will get shared out both via our websites, but also via our newsletter. So in our next slide, we'll kind of have some ways for you all to stay connected with us that we'll also send out via email. Yeah, Gabe, do you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, just you can email me directly if you'd like to, request technical assistance, or if you want a one-on-one, informational opportunity related to this. Or you can go through our website, which is listed here, and just hit the request assistance button, and it'll send you to a Google form that I shared in the chat, where you can provide some information about what you're working on and how we can help you.
Yeah,
And feel free to share this far and wide. I mean, I think a lot of the folks on this call are maybe kind of at an upper level and tracking some of this. So feel free to kind of relay people to this landing page, or to, Emery's landing page, which is listed below, or tests. There's many different points of entry. It's offering similar programming, or, similar access to this community navigator support. And so just want you to, have the information you need to kind of use this yourself, or to refer other folks to this program to get, in touch with technical support. And so I'm going to leave this just for one more second here. So if you haven't written this down, please do, or make a note of it. I'll share the FACNM Community Navigator link in the chat as well once I stop screen sharing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And then we just want to open it up to the group for some questions. We recognize this is kind of we're building this program. Currently it's a different kind of approach than we might be familiar with. But how can we kind of help provide some common understanding today?
Or we've just seen in the chat that there's definitely some opportunities for us to better connect with some of the program managers on the call. So also would welcome feedback on how we can better coordinate with you all and what you're working on.
Awesome. Yeah, Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I'll go again. This is fantastic. Like I said, I think what we're going to use, I think you guys might be aware, but the U.S. Forest Service has actually funded its own cadre of community navigators that are actually Forest Service employees. So I think for Region 3, what we're going to do is we'll try to focus our issues and questions that are coming to the underserved, tribes and forest landowners. We'll try to direct those to our community navigator internal to our U.S. Forest Service, and then he can build the connections with you and with FNDI and Lindsay Riggs and that. And then that way, I think it'll help if they do that in other places too. I think it'll help prevent the confusion from maybe some of these tribes dealing with all these different community navigators all over the place. But it might be just an idea to try to centralize, several points of contact rather than all these, hundreds of them or something. So just an idea.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, Lauren, I can share. Thanks for that. All of the community navigator organizations and the Forest Service navigators have kind of started at different times. And so it hasn't been scheduled yet, but we have our first big group meeting with all of the navigator organizations and the Forest Service navigators in late April so that we can coordinate our efforts. But yeah, that's a great idea.
I wonder if Sean wanted to just pop on as Region 3's new community navigator. Haven't had a chance to see you and meet yet.
I'm camera off today because I got my two littles home. They're home for Easter break, so a little crazy in the household. But Sean Fren came on about 3 weeks ago as the community navigator for the region for the Forest Service, and coming from previous to this, I ran one of the city councilor's office at the city of Albuquerque. And prior to that, worked with the public interest research group around the country, working on environmental and advocacy issues. So long history in community organizing, and excited to be working with y'all.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Yeah, Nick?
I guess I kind of had a question. So for down here on the Lincoln National Forest, would I be talking to Sean, or who would be that representative for down this way?
So I'm for the entire region we're kind of figuring out how everything's going to happen. But if there's so you can contact me without a problem, that's for sure. If there's a particular thing you're interested in, there's different folks for the community navigator partners who are in the community who have particular expertise. Like if you're looking with tribal relations, then First Nations or IANTA are going to be really helpful. If you're looking for more expertise, folks on the call would be your go-to, but I can also connect you with the folks who would have the expertise that would be applicable to the situation. So I could be your first point of contact as someone since you're from the Forest Service. I think that would probably be the smoothest thing for us. But you're also free to connect the people within your communities down in the Lincoln to the various navigator groups if you think there's one that's particularly good for them.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to do is we already kind of have some groups that are forming. And so we're both Lincoln County and Otero County. And there's some, I think basically a general need for just maybe not so much a navigator, but a coordinator that would help kind of work through some of these hurdles that no one has the full-time capacity right now to really stay focused on all the many irons that are in the fire, I guess would be my my thoughts on it. Obviously somebody hiring a coordinator down here that would assist the agencies that are working together is kind of what would be needed, but maybe I'm kind of barking up the wrong tree here.
I can speak to that a little bit. I mean, my sense of how this functions a bit is like, to get into the Community Navigator Program, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Sean, you could reach out to Emery. But once you're in the program, we can kind of work with you to get you the right support. Does that make sense? So there's many points of entry. I know that can seem confusing, but really they're all going to kind of get you into our back end, and then we can kind of work to coordinate who's going to serve you the best. Does that make sense? So there are
Some sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go through the form that I've just linked in there, I can work with other navigators to kind of find out if I can provide the assistance that you need. If you're needing a more long format, kind of more in-depth type of assistance related to, land management, issues, that kind of stuff, we can work with FACNet or COCO. If it's related to working with Hispanic communities, Hispanic Access Foundation might be the best fit. If you're working with, First Nations folks, First Nation Development Institute. So that's why I'm saying we're trying to kind of allow you a point of entry that's kind of consistent, but then we can kind of work on the back end, from my understanding, to find a fit for your specific needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of puts it in the right framework. Yeah, it just seems like for our scenario down here, I can't be the necessarily spokesperson for all those groups. And so just getting them in touch with the right people, I feel like is a better way to go.
I hear you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or thoughts? I think just to share a little bit of kind of like how the Guild and the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network is approaching this is like, we're already kind of woven into a lot of different landscape scale restoration projects or community oriented mitigation programs, that kind of stuff. And we're hoping to just kind of make a seamless offer of this type of support within those programs. So rather than needing folks to kind of learn a new program, learn a new kind of set of things, we can just offer grant support now through the Learning Network. Or through guild programs, there's capacity to support technical assistance.
So I'm going to come forward with one question that comes up because I was at a workshop a couple of days ago. A lot of the communities who we're trying to outreach to may not necessarily have an excess of time. That's why we're trying to reach out to them, right? So if people know about specific communities who they feel could benefit from getting involved in the Community Navigators Program and getting in touch with a regional navigator, can we connect those people directly to you, or have you do the outreach rather than have them have to go in and submit a request for assistance?
Yes. So we're kind of also doing targeted outreach to folks that we've worked with through existing programs. So like, you know, with underserved communities, like these folks aren't getting our newsletters currently. They're not maybe on the webinar today. And so there's need to just kind of reach out to certain reference organizations and, meet with them and do that kind of initial relationship building step and outreach step. And that is a part of this work for sure. The technical assistance comes once there's like appetite for federal funding, if there is appetite for federal funding. But there is certainly that step I think that you're mentioning, Rachel, of just like, how do we reach out to people that aren't even kind of tracking this, but that might be interested? And so there is outreach associated with this program as well. And if folks from this call or within the network want to recommend that we reach out to certain groups or have seen certain groups kind of demonstrate an interest in this type of support, we really hope to be able to work with you all in that way. And so you can fill out that form on there and just meet with me and kind of on behalf of like, this is something that you need to be tracking, or some outreach that could be helpful for this program. That's another way we can approach this. It's really kind of working with our existing relationships to get this information out as effectively as possible and this capacity.
Yeah, and I'll just say that this has been a really useful kind of interaction, just figuring out the different ways that people might want to be connecting with this program and us. And so we'll continue to kind of try to adjust what sort of connection points we're offering and how we share that out with folks, and making it just as easy as possible. As I think Kathleen acknowledged in the chat, it's a new program. We're continuing to kind of build it out and figure out how we're working with one another. So appreciate the grace, and also just know that we'll continue to take this feedback and adapt our processes to respond to it. We're getting up at the top of the hour.
Yeah, any final comments or questions that we might be able to answer or closing it down?
Oh,
Cool.
maybe I have one more here. Are you guys planning to do another one of these? It seems like these would be real good to have like maybe whatever once a month, and then maybe actual tribes or whoever underserved, interested landowners can actually dial into these, and hopefully the group will get a lot larger.
Yeah, we want to do kind of more workshop format, like moving around the state and providing kind of like in-person engagement. But I definitely think there's going to continually there will be continual opportunities for virtual engagement as well. But as we've thought about it more, kind of that in-person kind of workshop format, so we could work with you, Lauren, or other kind of points of contact across the state to set something like that up, like a workshop in your area related to this program. It's tricky. Yeah, like with this webinar, like just calling it Community Navigators Program maybe doesn't tell people like what we're talking about as much as, so just kind of like dropping some breadcrumbs about like, this is about development or grant writing or, technical assistance, or like finding a way for us to kind of unpack that a little bit for our audience or for folks that might be interested is something that I want to continue to think about. But yeah, if this seems helpful to kind of have a recurring forum virtually, like we can set that up for sure. Sounds like that could be helpful.
No, I really like your idea. Maybe you could have one that's like grant writing, whatever, or maybe one seminar or webinars just reporting or, different things to cover different topics. That's a really great idea. I like that.
Alrighty. So you have Gabe's contact information if anyone wants to reach out to one of our local regional navigators to ask any follow-up questions. You also have my contact information in the chat. You can reach out to me if you want any of these resources. And just want to thank everybody for being online today. Thank Emery, Gabe, and Tess for providing this really good information. And provide a reminder that this webinar was recorded. It's going to be up on the FACTNM YouTube page as well as our website, maybe a little condensed for clarity. And we will share out all of the resources that have been shared here through that video as well. So you can send that to colleagues or communities who you think would be interested in knowing about it. And we look forward to continuing to engage on this topic. So thanks so much for being online today, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you, you too.
You.